But when you were writing The Kill Chain, I mean, it is true that you saw where the future of warfare was headed, unlike anyone else. And I would love for you to talk about, what did you get right? Where were your predictions right? And where have you seen sort of the future play out? And then maybe what surprised you? Maybe what changed that you weren't expecting?
Yeah. When I was writing the book and when I was doing what little research I actually did for it, because I was working full-time at Anduril, which was very much a full-time job, and writing the book was something I did between the hours of 3 in the morning and 8 in the morning in California when I was on East Coast time, sitting in my hotel room. I think the thing that was striking to me was how much of what I was saying had been said for 25 years. And the real story was how little of what we had been saying collectively we needed to do was actually being done. Yeah. So I think in that respect, in terms of the things that I got right, I'm not going to sit here and suggest that I discovered a new law of kinematics. I think that a lot of it had been ground that had been trod before. I think what's changed is how quickly that change has actually played out, and far faster than I would have thought. Mm-hmm. When I was writing it, I kind of believed that these types of changes that I was writing about, that many people in this room are working to push forward every day, could happen incredibly quickly, right? If we got out of our own way, if the government were better. But to see how fast it's actually playing out, right? To sit here 5 years later and look at a room full of founders who are working in defense technology, multiple companies valued over $1 billion, performing on capabilities and programs for the Department of Defense that people whose first name is Secretary in Chief are concentrated on. I thought maybe we'd get there by the latter part of the decade, which I was worried it was going to take too long. But the fact that we're now at this place in the beginning of 2025 is kind of amazing.
Yeah. How has it affected how Anduril chooses to make products? Because I think in the beginning when you joined, you were working on one product, but you were working on Lattice. A lot of the kind of scaffolding of the original vision is still there, but now you are doing so much to keep up with the demand, to keep up with the fact that you called the future right. How has it changed sort of how the organization has grown? Yeah,
I think it's sort of shocking when I think back to the 6.5 years ago when I started at Anduril. Much of what we said we wanted to do are things that we're now doing. We just never would have believed that we would be capable of doing them on the timeline that we're now doing them on. But the sort of movement into all-domain autonomous systems, the movement into real weapons production, all of it obviously kind of software defined, all of it sort of defined by commercial technology. That was kind of the game plan from the get-go. And I think a lot of the specificity has been very much something that the government has driven with different programs and requirements. But from the beginning, that was the original vision, right? And the smaller things that we were working on, the stuff that fits in the lobby out here, they were great programs. Many of them are still phenomenal programs that are making a difference for warfighters. They're important to the business. But I think we always had a sort of more ambitious guise of this is where we're going to start, but it's going to help us level up to larger systems, things that are longer range, carry more payload, more relevant to an Admiral Paparo, out in Indo-Pacific Command. Totally. Well, and it's interesting you mentioned Indo-Pacific because so much changed too with Ukraine. Yeah. But then of course you're working for multiple theaters. You now have a space business. There's so much that you're doing now that's not just directly related to kind of now. It's really related to the future. So maybe talk a little bit about that, how you plan for those products, whether it's things that are happening in Ukraine or things that are happening in Indo-Pacific. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Ukraine because I think that's actually been the biggest catalyst, right? I think many of the things that I was writing about in the book, many things that others were talking about and writing about at the same time, they were all kind of interesting. They had sort of a science fiction cast or kind of an interesting think tank cast. Then to see it all kind of play out in high relief in Ukraine, and the lines of it had been there for folks who had been paying attention. But I think that was the sort of collective realization that a lot of people had that, oh wow, all of these kind of low-cost, more autonomous things can kill tanks, they can kill battleships. This is a war of mass and attrition and production. These are not going to be short wars, they're going to be long wars. The sort of meat and potatoes of what great power competition actually is, if we look back historically, that I think has just kind of completely opened up the conversation and really kind of created a lot of the energy that we're now seeing. So for us at Anduril, it's really been a similar type of focus on, hey, we're obviously going to sit down and we're going to work closely with the government. We're going to listen to what the government has to say. To borrow a line from Palmer, he said, I will always be interested in the government's definition of its problems, but I'm not going to necessarily believe that they know what the right solution to that problem is.
Amen.
So the willingness to, sit down in the room and actually kind of ideate, to tell people when we think that they're wrong and kind of push in a different direction. And then obviously having the courage of our own convictions to put IRAD behind the things that we're looking to build. I mean, that's how a space business got started for us, right? I mean, it wasn't like we just magicked into a gigantic space program. I mean, it was years of investment and work that sort of earned us the right to not get laughed out of the room when we showed up and said, look, I think we have something to offer here.
Totally. I mean, the other thing that's really changed that I think is really extraordinary that we couldn't have expected post-Ukraine is you were in many ways alone. You were the first mover. There were only a handful of companies, Shield, you all, but there were not many venture-backed defense companies for obvious reasons that have been talked about. Defense was taboo in Silicon Valley, very difficult to build, in that pre-2022 era. Now you have this array, and you can see it out in the lobby, this array of companies that are operating that want to partner. Many are subbing to each other. Many are working on programs together. Did you predict that would happen? And how has it changed how Anduril thinks about its business now that there's so many other companies that can potentially be either a supplier or a partner?
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome, right? I mean, I think in the early days, there were obviously other companies that had sort of like plowed a lot of that ground for us when Anduril got started, right? I mean, certainly Shield, but before that even Palantir, SpaceX, others. There were people who were doing this work, but I mean, just the explosion of interest and energy, frankly, just kind of the strength in numbers, right? I mean, when you're kind of off doing it on your own, you kind of, in those times of reflection, say, like, maybe I'm crazy and this whole thing is the wrong pursuit. To just see how much interest there is in this, how much energy is just super exciting. And it's helpful, right? I think the conversation in Washington has changed completely around the types of companies that can do this work, and frankly now the expectation that we need them to do this work. Back when we got started, I mean, it was sort of you have to kind of explain your reason for being and justify your existence when you would go into these meetings. And my sense is there's now a lot more kind of wind at the sort of collective back of people in this room, where it's less about having to convince people that you can do it, and it's more walking into rooms where people are expecting that you are the kind of company or you're the type of capability that is going to answer the biggest problems that they have. Oh. So just that sort of, again, strength in numbers, the ecosystem, and then for us as a company, the ability to have teammates across the sort of defense technology ecosystem is fantastic. I mean, I just got back from Project Convergence Capstone with the Army out at Fort Irwin, where we were teamed up on a command and control program with a lot of different companies, many of whom are in this room, many more to come. The ability to sort of pull companies that have the same kind of DNA, that want to go quickly, that are risk tolerant, that are going to lean in. Those are the best kind of partners to have, whether we're subbing to them or they're subbing to us, or it's not even that kind of a relationship. Just having that kind of talent on the field is better for everybody.
Totally. Well, similar to SpaceX, I think this year, especially 2025, there really hasn't been a day where you haven't broken news about a new program, a new product. I mean, it really is just incredible the pace at which Anduril is working. I would love to understand, you're not a startup anymore. I think sometimes people say you're now 8 years old, but you're actually a company that has grown to such size. What do the next 5-10 years look like for Anduril?
Yeah, we kind of go round and round on this, right? It's like we're not a startup, but we're not big by defense standards. Like totally. We're not a prime, but we're larger. I mean, we haven't figured out yet what to call ourselves. The next 5 years, I think, look like a couple of things. I mean, one is production at scale, right? So we've had to kind of like fight our way out of Earth's atmosphere on a lot of programs, where we're now in a position on large contracts where we have to deliver systems at scale. And that journey has been something that we've been on now for the past few years, really digging deep into how manufacturing in defense can be done totally differently to get different types of outcomes. So whether it's low-cost cruise missiles, collaborative combat aircraft, large and extra-large autonomous undersea vehicles, or a host of other things, the real challenge for us over the next 5 years is proving that we can deliver these systems on time, on cost, that we can scale to the quantities that we believe are going to be necessary and that the government partners we're working with increasingly are wanting. So we've got to prove all that out. Then at the same time, I think it's a whole bunch of new territory that we're excited to move into, right? I mean, whether it's Soldier-Borne Mission Command following the kind of the acquisition of the IVAS program, the ability to just revolutionize what it means to be a soldier on the battlefield, connected to systems and sensors that extend your, kind of agency and awareness beyond line of sight, beyond the reach of your own arms. That's an incredibly exciting frontier. That's, if anything, Palmer Luckey was put on Earth to do, it is revolutionizing that. So that's going to be wildly exciting. And then I think just getting to larger scale, right? So this journey that we've been on has been starting with systems that we thought were big and then realizing that actually there's a much larger version kind of around the corner that's going to be relevant for the warfighter because it's longer range, it carries more payload, it's a more capable system. And oh, by the way, it still can be mass manufactured, it can be built and bought at low cost, and it can deploy it in large numbers. So I think whether it's space systems, undersea systems, aircraft, or other things, there's just a lot of new products and programs out there that we're excited to create and build.
Totally. I want to ask you too about the broader defense tech movement because it's hot right now. Investors are super excited about investing in defense technology. Founders are super excited for building for it, but we don't take that as a given, right? Like that it will always be there. So I would love to understand what your message is for the DoD on how to take advantage of this unique moment where there's this incredible investment subsidy for R&D, where there's this incredible movement of founders wanting to build for their country. What's your advice to them to take advantage of it?
Yeah, a lot of the advice is you've got to kind of play the long game here. And I think we've had our trials and tribulations and false starts and missteps as a company. And, at each step of the way, we've been fortunate to have government partners who have understood that that's kind of a feature, not a bug. And I think that's broadly true for the defense technology ecosystem of companies as a whole. The companies that are here today might not necessarily be all the companies that are here in 5 to 10 years. We're all going to make missteps. We're all going to, step on rakes and do bad things. We're going to run quickly and field prototypes that don't work. But I think that's the point that the government is starting to understand, which is that is the way you actually get good technology. And the alternative is worse, right? The alternative of give me $11 billion in 10 years and leave me alone, and then you'll have this amazing whiz-bang thing. Most of the time, that stuff never shows up. So this more iterative, fast-moving, highly kind of fluid, slightly chaotic approach is something that I think people in government are increasingly comfortable with. Frankly, many of them are excited by it. The other thing that I think should not go, unsaid is how many people in government have kind of been waiting for this, right? They're similar ages to many of us in this room. They've lived their whole lives with broken and bad technology. They use technology in their day-to-day lives that kick the ass of the things that they're handed to, in government service. And they just know that there's something better out there. And the fact that you now have this kind of group of companies showing up and actually delivering on the very thing that these people have secretly wanted their whole lives and now, are able to get, there's an enormous excitement that I detect in government for that and for people like this in this room. And it's an awesome thing to be a part of. Totally.
So I want to end with, you saw the future in 2020. You saw the future with Anduril. You knew that this was the company that was going to build. If you were writing the kill chain in 2025, what would you update? If you were writing a new forward or changing something, would you update anything? And where do you think we'll be in 2030?
It's a great question. I think the things that I would probably spend more time on in the book are really the things that frankly I've been spending a lot of time on in recent years, which is all around production and manufacturing. It was kind of in there, but it just wasn't a point of emphasis. And I think when you kind of look back historically, the past 25, 30 years is just a complete historical anomaly in terms of America being top of the heap, laps ahead of the competition. The idea of a great power, peer threat just wasn't even on anybody's radar or horizon. Most of human history hasn't been that way. And if you just pick an example of when it has been, everything is about, a significant and robust industrial base, the ability to produce at scale, the ability to replenish when you lose large numbers of things, which you inevitably will in any type of great power competition or conflict. I think that has become really the defining feature, or one of the defining features of this movement, right? I think we've won the argument that, technologies like AI and autonomy and advanced manufacturing and other things, software-defined systems, commercial technology has a significant role to play in defense. I think the next frontier here, which many of us are helping to push forward, is demonstrating that that can be produced at scales that the defense world would not recognize, right? You know, a lot in traditional industry kind of break their arms patting themselves on the back when they're fielding systems in, you know, dozens or hundreds. And I think what we're going to need is fielding systems in thousands and tens of thousands, and being able to do it not for like a few days, but for months and potentially years at a time, if God forbid we ever end up in the type of conflict that, you know, I was certainly concerned about when I was writing the book, and I think all of us are spending our, you know, waking hours and many of our kind of like nightmarish days and nights trying desperately to deter and avoid.
Totally. Well, I know we all look forward to the next book. Not to put you on the spot.
I am a first-time author, and I'm going to aim to keep it that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know how people are repeat offenders in that regard. The whole thing was like generally a miserable experience.
Well, especially while working so hard at Anduril, too.
Yeah,
so we'll let you focus on your day job. Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
So good to have you here. So great
Really
to have
nice
you
to see
here.
you. Thanks.